Hello. Today we are going to be starting our 2D game tutorial. By the end of this series, hopefully you'll be able to have a better understanding of how 2D games work on Unity, as well as be able to make your own 2D tower defense game. Before we get started, we are going to go over the basics on what are the objectives of the tutorial. What is a 2D game? And what is a 2D tower defense? And what are the essential components for a 2D tower defense game? In this video, we will have some objectives to complete. Our primary objective here is to learn about 2D Unity development. In general, what we can do with it. We will do this through the tower defense game that we will be making. Our first objective is to learn what is a 2D game and what is a tower defense game, and how to create one, of course. The second objective is to learn examples of 2D tower defense and what makes them great. We will need to study the related literature of other tower defense games. With that, our last objective for this video is to learn the essentials of a tower defense game and why a tower defense and what makes a tower defense game a tower defense game. Generally, a 2D game operates within a two-dimensional environment, normally with a side scroll or a top-down view perspective. Other elements in the game, like characters, objectives, and backgrounds, are also pleased with using a two-dimensional perspective. Compared to 3D games, the lack of visual depth, 2D games compensate with a strong art direction and creative level design. Those points that is essentially what a 2D game is. A tower defense game is an old classic type of game genre where the player must defend an objective using towers and traps to defeat enemies, while also defending the objective. Most of the time, this is a top-down view, but some modern tower defense games offers a more unique twist to them. The goal in the tower defense game is to use the towers to stop the enemies from reaching the base. Most towers in tower defense games traditionally just shoot enemies like turrets in real life. Modern tower defense games, however, become much more complicated, with different towers with their own different use cases. Depending on the situation, you may want to use different kinds of towers. This keeps the game interesting and strategic, requiring the player to think and strategize tower placements and upgrades for the upcoming waves. Here, we will display examples of tower defense games, some familiar and some not so familiar. Now, let's see what we can observe in the following games. Our first example is a tower defense Clash, which is a classic Flash game found free online. This game features very basic towers that are so simplistic that we could easily replicate most of it with modern software tools such as Unity. This is proof that a game does not need to be complicated to be great. Plants vs. Zombies. Still technically a tower defense game, but it is played quite differently. In this tower defense, the player gains resources or sunlight through a plant that produces it, which is the currency to buy plants. Plants, which are the towers. Unlike in most tower defense games, where the resources comes from defeating enemies, this one, you can find them passively around the screen, or it is produced by the towers. Unless you feed them a specific plant called the sunbeam, which upon eaten allows the enemies to drop some sun. In Plants vs. Zombies, the enemies also go in a straight line, and the towers actually stand in the way of the zombies. We are not making a tower defense like this, but at least we can learn the tower defense games comes in unique variants. Bloons TD, or Tower Defense, is one of the most popular series of all time. Being one of the more modern traditional tower defense games, Bloons TD6 features several different types of towers, each with their own unique situational benefit. With a large roster of towers, the game also comes with several maps to really make different towers shine in their own way. The game is relatively balanced, where most towers can be useful if they get upgraded enough and are paired with the right towers. This balance of variation encourages creativity, ingenuity in one's gameplay. Now that we have an idea of what 2D tower defense game looks like, we are going to go over them one by one. Keep in mind that these are only some of the components in a tower defense game. Some have more, others have less, but these are the most common ones. The top down view is generally described as a bird's eye perspective, meaning you have a wide or full view of the map, including enemy positions, the path they're going to take, and tower placements. This also offers immersive and engaging gameplay, making the player to be able to react and adapt to the situation if needed, a characteristic of 2D tower defense games. Tower defense movement is pretty simplistic in traditional tower defense games. The enemies simply follow a predetermined path from start to finish, the finish being the objective to defend. This on its own is quite monotonous. To make the enemies more interesting, they have varying properties such as faster speed, tougher health, or even dynamics, such as immunities to certain types of towers. These variations consequently encourage the players to innovate and adapt their defenses and tower placements to the ever changing waves of enemies down the path. In tower defense games, enemies are normally set in waves, meaning all enemies are spawned in at once. This also determines how frequently enemy waves are introduced, meaning that waves of enemies are spaced with a set time so that players are given time to prepare for the next wave. Adding to that, enemy spawning also controls the flow of the game, forcing the player to make strategic decisions regarding defense. Tower targeting. This allows towers to aim at the enemies and eliminate them, and is quite satisfying to watch when it happens for you automatically, even in development phase. The targeting of the towers allows the towers a way to set which enemy to aim at. This is a fundamental feature to a tower defense game, as it is mostly how the tower aims at enemies. Note that some tower defense games do not require the towers to aim. Some even allow the player to personally aim the towers themselves. For our purposes, our towers will have targeting mechanics and will also be able to discriminate between targets, allowing for more strategic prioritization of enemies. Tower placements. This is how the player interacts with the world by placing towers in the designated locations around the map. Tower placements requires consideration from the player in regards to enemy pathing and tower synergy for optimal gameplay. Tower upgrades is what allows players to keep up with the ever improving waves of enemies. By upgrading their towers, increasing their defensive capabilities, for our own purposes, we will keep the upgrades to simply increase basic stats such as damage, attack speed, and targeting range. Other more advanced tower games, however, feature more advanced upgrades such as change in bullets, a change in damage property, and even outright a change in tower as an upgrade. Health and economy. A health and currency tracker is essential in most games that involves fighting or purchasing of any kind. In tower defense games, health is usually deducted from any enemy that makes it past the defenses and reaches the end of the path. The currency tracker, on the other hand, tracks how much currency a player owns. In our game, we earn currency by defeating enemies. This helps the player decide what kind of towers they can afford. That wraps up our quick introduction to 2D tower defense games. Hopefully, by the end of the series, you'll feel confident in creating your own 2D tower defense game. It's crucial to emphasize the importance of learning the basics and fundamentals of the game development, understanding what a game like a 2D tower defense is. Next video, we will go over enemy movement and rigid body feature in Unity.